So, some of my thoughts on the latest developments on the Ukraine situation. I keep referring it to the Ukraine situation rather than the Ukraine-Russia situation or East-West situation or whatever. I think Ukraine is the most appropriate term because pretty much everything here is happening within the territory of Ukraine. I know the Crimea has essentially been ceded into Russia recently, but for now I'll refer to these updates as Ukraine updates. So, if you've been following developments, you'll know there's a big referendum today, and it's more or less internationally been rejected as legally valid. Basically, the Russians are holding this referendum in Crimea to try and legitimize their presence there. And they've been isolated on the world stage. Basically, the situation, as I see it, is that 13 members of the Security Council, that I presume that means Extended Security Council, have vetoed the referendum as illegal. Samantha Powers, the US ambassador to the UN, gave quite a powerful speech on this. I don't know if she's the full ambassador, she might be a representative. Anyway, she gave quite a powerful speech in terms of it being illegitimate and Crimea will continue to be part of Ukraine, whatever Russia argues. Now, already there seems to be some flaws with the nature of the referendum. Apparently, according to the BBC, there is no option on the ballot to say no, I don't want Crimea to be part of Russia. So it's basically a very politicised question. There's no option for the alternative view. It's basically trying to legitimise the pro-Russian view. So clearly that's flawed. You can't hold a referendum if you're only going to ask one side. I mean, we're holding a referendum in Scotland in September, which is an issue I'm going to cover a lot more in my videos as the time comes close. I believe that's a huge issue in this country. But anyway, that is going to be a two-sided referendum. There's going to be a yes or no choice. In this referendum, it's simply a choice of do we go into Russia? And that's the question. There's no sort of option for the opposing view, which means that people, Ukrainians in Crimea, even ethnic Russians in Crimea who want to be part of Ukraine, they've said they're just going to stay at home because there's a pointless referendum. So for Russia to be trumpeting democracy here it's a bit phony. It's also phony because if Russia applied the same principles to everywhere that it perceives to be its territory, then the Chechens would also have a referendum. So would the Dagestanis and the Ingushetians and every other troublesome republic. So clearly this is a stunt by Russia to try and legitimize their presence in the region. There are reports that there are Russian troops entering Ukraine proper. If that's true, it's very serious. There was serious violence broke out in Donetsk between pro-Russian factions and pro-Ukrainian factions. I've said before there's extremists on both sides, but it seems to me that as Russia stirring up this situation, I would not be surprised if there are Russian agents on the ground stirring things up. I'm not saying that is the case, I can't prove it, but it wouldn't surprise me. Because this sort of wave of neo-nationalism that we've seen, my question is, why has it all come suddenly? Since the Euromaidan. Why is that suddenly, why have we seen this sudden upsurge of Russian nationalism? Why has it not always been there? If these people are so pro-Russian, why haven't they held demonstrations before Euromaidan to go back into Russia? So it seems logical to me to think that there may be something going on behind the scenes, that Moscow is basically interfering and trying to stir up ethnic tensions whilst claiming that they're trying to defend Russian speakers. They keep quoting thugs on the Ukrainian side, far-right fascists and so on, and I'm dismayed to see leftists in Britain and elsewhere basically toe Moscow's line. It's true that there's unsavoury elements like the far-right group Yambloko, I think it's called, and it's true they have quite a lot of influence, but what Russia is doing is saying the entire Ukrainian opposition is made up of the far right, and it's a gross distortion. Let's not forget, it's only a few weeks since over 100 Ukrainians were gunned down in the streets. So, if anything, I've enormous respect for the restraint that Ukraine has showed in the light of Russian aggression. Another interesting thing about this is Russia does really stand alone this time. Russia's major ally at the Security Council, China, the two countries that often take the same stance, for example, in Syria. China made a significant move. They abstained from the vote. That's China's way of saying we're not going to back Russia. They didn't actually go out and condemn Russia through a veto of the referendum, but by abstaining, that is a strong message to Moscow that Beijing isn't going to back Moscow on this one. And I think the reason for that is quite clear. The Chinese have always held the principle of sovereignty in high regard, because it's a very sensitive issue for the Chinese when you consider places like Tibet and Xinjiang. In fact, Chinese foreign policy is probably dictated by the issue of sovereignty more than anything else. Russia is a country that, since the end of the Cold War, has demonstrated time and time again it couldn't give a damn about the sovereignty of some of its satellite states, neighbouring states. So I think there's a lot of hypocrisy on the Russian side. The ball is ultimately in Vladimir Putin's court. He does have a lot of power within the Russian power structure, the Russian political structure, so a lot of this comes down to the man. And I think that if there is to be an avoidance of war at this stage, Russia needs to de-escalate. I haven't seen, charges of the West meddling. I haven't seen any sort of, I haven't seen any European or American diplomats going in there and saying, oh, the Russians are thugs, the Russians are this, the Russians are that. There's no vilification of the Russian populace, whereas the Russian side has been branding the Ukrainians as far-right fascists. Some of them might be, but there's plenty of far-right fascists on the Russian side as well. And one last point, it's interesting to see that there's growing domestic opposition within Russia, maybe not in Crimea, but within Russia itself, against Russian military action. And it's almost like history in reverse. I wouldn't say the situation's exactly like Iraq, of course not, but you're seeing a growing opposition in Russia against Putin's warmongering here. And that's what it is. Quite large, significant protests in Moscow. So there's obviously a significant proportion of the Russian population that don't like the trend their country's taken, and they don't like to see Russia isolated on the world stage. And my respect to them. One of the biggest problems the West made was Iraq, because we isolated ourselves. There was not sufficient international support for that. Well, now Russia's doing exactly the same thing. And in this case, it's really, this referendum really is meaningless. So whatever happens tomorrow, it doesn't matter if it's 99% in favour of being pro-Russia, because the people who don't want to be in Russia will have not voted, because they will have seen it as illegitimate. So the referendum itself is deeply flawed with the nature of that question. So it really doesn't matter what the result is. It's an illegitimate referendum.